to the truckers is keep your heads, gents. Don't take the bait. You know what you're doing, producing a community there, cleaning up the streets, trying to care for the homeless, keeping a playful spirit about this, that's crucial. You know, to do it with a sense of play, that's a sign of mastery. It's a very difficult thing to attain. And don't let your frustration translate itself into violence. Out as the weeks progress, because it's a constant choice, you know, and it seems to me that the truckers and the protesters that accompany them, by and large, have been making the right choices. The demonstrations have remained peaceful. They're not taking the bait, and we'll see what happens this weekend, because the data seem to be fairly convincing, and I think have been actually for several months, that Omicron is a rather serious flu and no more than that. And the Johns Hopkins study that was released the other day seems to indicate quite clearly that lockdowns didn't have the desired effect on mortality. Now people are criticizing the study and saying, well, that wasn't the only positive effect. Roots thing, which is so interesting watching the NDP react to this. It's so stunning to me that Elon Musk tweets out in favor of the truckers, and Jagmeet Singh, who's an actor unparalleled in his falseness, perhaps only by Trudeau, has so clearly indicated how little he wants to do with the working class of the assault on our fundamental freedoms, essentially. And it's up to leaders like Trudeau and Singh and the Conservatives to articulate those voices and to bring them forward peacefully and to attend to them instead of demonizing them and then doing these unbelievably appalling maneuvers. First of all, focusing on the Confederate flag. And the mainstream media is absolutely complicit in this. It's like, that is so preposterous that it's so surreal. It's hard to believe it's even true, as if the Confederate flag has anything to do with Canadian history, as if it ever has, as if there's people rallying behind that in some important sense. And the same thing can be said about the single swastika flag, which is one too many, obviously, and the idea that the Terry Fox statue was desecrated compared to, say, what happened to the John A. Macdonald statue. I understand the truckers have put guard around it now, and what the legacy media is doing with the trucker protest is beyond reprehensible. I think the most dangerous thing I've seen, actually, is the political attempts to shut down the GoFundMe funding. That's unparalleled. I think that's an unparalleled act in Canadian history. I truly think that's the worst thing that's happened to us so far. Not invariably, I'm not cynical about politicians, but the act of sheer short-sighted, narcissistic, self-righteous idiocy that went into blocking the GoFundMe funding I cannot believe that our political leadership can be that unconcerned even about their own well-being. What sort of precedent does this set? And it's basically a form of theft, collusion between a fairly large corporate entity, GoFundMe, and the government. It's like collusion between the government and the press, which is almost total now in Canada. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, Brian Peckford, who I interviewed on my YouTube channel about a week and a half ago, who is a mainstream political figure and one of the drafters of the Canadian Charter of Rights, like a respectable guy, and was never a radical, relatively well regarded by the left and the right alike in the 1980s, a solid guy, told me flat out that the reason that he announced his legal challenge to the authority of our government on my YouTube channel was because he didn't think that he could get the truth told about what he was doing by any reliable Canadian news outlet. And that's just, what do you do when someone like that says something like that to you? It's beyond comprehension. It's a planned, no worse than that, it's a planned parallel reality, which is fundamentally equivalent to a totalitarian encroachment. I mean, CBC should be shut down. Canadians should just say enough. There's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for another single dollar of Canadian taxpayer money to go to support that appallingly corrupt, ideologically warped, politically correct, collusionary media source with the federal government. It's inexcusable. And the rest of the media, well, it's part of their pronounced death spiral. You see a little exception to that. The Toronto Sun has had some decent reporting. You see it pop up now and then in the National Post. You see it pop up now and then even in the Globe and Mail. But by and large, it's almost impossible to see what's actually going on in Ottawa. Can't even get a reasonable estimate of the number of people there. And I've also heard, let's say, that this closed circuit cameras that normally monitor the city, which I believe you can get access to by public feed, many of them have been shut off. To Ottawa to oppose our possibly illegal mandates, probably illegal mandates. What's wrong with you? You must be all of these terrible things. And then let's get the press in on it too. And then, I would hope that the Conservatives, for their part, would stand up in some sort of opposition. But I know full well, because I've talked to people who know that COVID policy is being governed entirely by public opinion poll, which is a terrible way of sampling public opinion because it's impulsive and narrow, which is why we have a parliamentary system to begin with. We don't have rule by direct democracy because it's foolish. It doesn't allow for any sober second thought, let's say. And so the politicians scare the public, and they do that with the collusion of psychologists and behavioral experts, scare them into compliance. And so then they're all scared, and then they sample public opinion, which is terrified by misinformation, and say, oh, look, people support more mandates, and that scares them further, and away we go. And the Conservatives, for their part, instead of, although Mo and Kenny have taken some more forthright actions in the last week, instead of seizing the moment, which they clearly had in front of them, they just blew their party into fragments, like on the very day they should have been articulating the concerns of the people that they are supposed to represent. And they could have capitalized on that even in the narrow political sense. It's just beyond comprehension. Well, I don't know what it would mean to lose it. I mean, I can't see how the mandates can go on forever. Country after country is dropping them. I cannot see how they can be sustained in the face of that for any length of time, but God only knows. I mean, it seems to me that perhaps even a majority of Canadians, if they were sufficiently cowed, would accept these restrictions and mask mandates permanently. It's already been 2 years. And there's a huge public outcry, although it's hard to tell what the proportions are, against the truckers. And in favor of what? Continued mandates? Well, they're afraid. I remember there was a poll a few months ago showing that 50% of Democrats in the US thought there was a 50% chance of being hospitalized with COVID. And 25% of Republicans believe the same thing. And I'm sure the proportions are very similar in Canada. People are afraid, and the politicians should be coming out and saying, we got this. Like, there's always things to be afraid of, but that isn't what's happened. I really have no idea how this is going to go. I think what will happen is that a few provinces will carefully test the public opinion waters, which seems to be happening, say, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and say, well, here's a way out in a month. How's that settling? And if that works out, they'll say, well, maybe we'll try it in 2 weeks, something like that. And if that happens, maybe there's a pathway forward. But our prime minister could easily double down because he's a teenager. He's a teenage actor, fundamentally. The fact that he ran away at the beginning of this and then lied about why in 2 ways, security concerns and exposure to COVID, it's like a little convenient, I would say. And really, did you need 2 lies to justify it? Wasn't one enough? Apparently not. And the fact that he ran away at all is just also jaw-droppingly stunning to me. It's like truckers are dangerous, like Confederate rebel dangerous, whatever the hell that means in Canada. Nazi dangerous. This whole Nazi thing is just beyond comprehension. Canada doesn't have a radical right wing. Well, I think it's easier for people to believe that the truckers are January 6th level insurrectionists than it is for them to believe that they have a leader who is that immature and cowardly. Because think about it, I mean, both of those are both nasty pills to swallow. But if you're a middle of the road Canadian and you've had an implicit belief in the stability of your political institutions, which is reasonable because they've been incredibly stable, you believe in the general goodness of your leaders, which has also been a valid presumption. And now you're forced to swallow this pill, which is, no, things are so bad that your leader, who's a teenage actor, literally ran away in the face of some political opposition, or these people can't be trusted. Well, obviously, it's much easier to believe that the truckers can't be trusted. And then that's played up, of course, in the media. It's like, well, what about the swastikas? And what about the Confederate flag? And people also still trust CTV. They still trust CBC, especially older people. And it's no wonder they do, because once you could, and they're not up on the technological revolution, and no bloody wonder, because who is? And so people are being asked to abandon faith in some sense in political establishments and political leadership, or demonize the truckers. Well, it's not surprising they pick the latter. But they like to believe that they're on the side of compassion and security when uncertainty and threat looms. And so that's the moral, and it's an easy moral victory. Remember, I used to watch The Simpsons all the time, and the wife of the Reverend on the Simpsons, her response to any political question was, think about the children. Let's think about the children. And our whole society has slipped into that kind of Oedipal virtue, which is, it's a reflexive infantile compassion. And there's a presumption underneath that the manifestation of that compassion, which is appropriate for infants, is the only valid political response to every single question. And so you frighten people, and the good thinkers, the maternal good thinkers, think, oh, well, security and safety, protect the infants. And fair enough, because you've got to protect the infants, but we're not infants. Or are we?